today we're talking with Sara Nanchanatt. She's a CPA, CFF, and is the founder of SN Forensics LLC, a boutique forensic accounting and business valuation firm based in New York City. With experience spanning insurance, litigation support, matrimonial matters, and financial investigations, she specializes in turning complex financial data into clear analysis for clients and courts. Drawing on her background at Travelers Insurance, FINRA, and boutique consulting firms, Sara brings both technical expertise and a practical, client-focused approach to every engagement. Hey, Sara, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
So nice to meet you, and I am super excited. Actually, I've been wanting a forensic analysis person on the podcast because I have so many clients who it's like, do I need one? Do I not need one? What do they do? And so I'm so happy to be able to speak with somebody who has expertise in the field.
Thanks for having me. And those questions, I hear them all the time. And I think part of the challenge is it's never cookie cutter based on like, if this happens, get a forensic accountant. It's always more nuanced. So happy to talk
Right.
through the questions and give what advice I can.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you share with us a little bit about your background and what led you into forensic accounting?
Yeah, so I say that I got very lucky. I applied for a forensic accounting job right off a job board when I was out of college, looking for my first opportunity. And I started at a big economic consulting firm that did forensic accounting. And we did really high level cases, like huge mergers and acquisitions, big company forensic cases. I then ended up spending a couple years at a federal regulator where I did fraud investigation. And then I moved to the insurance space. And so all of it kind of gave me the background and the tools I needed. And then I really wanted to feel a little bit more impact with my work and work on some of these quote unquote like smaller cases, but that really had an impact to an individual or a family or a business. And so that's how I started my business. And I really love getting to work with the smaller end user clients and see the difference that our work is able to make in their cases.
Yeah, I love that. And you are based out of New York City. Have you always been based there?
I have not. So I moved from Boston 2 years ago. My husband is a medical fellow, so we moved with his fellowship. And so if anywhere is a great place to launch a business, I can't think of a better place than New York City. I mean, just the opportunity of people to meet and people who might need your services is so much greater. But I also love that we work with clients all over the country. So I'm not geographic specific. I have cases right now in like Texas and California and Arkansas. And so really get to have a great network of people here, but also build it across the US.
Yeah, that's great. I love when people are able to help others outside of their geographic area. I think that's one nice thing that's come out of COVID, right? Is that we're all kind of more accessible now than we were before. So that's really good to know. And so for listeners who might not be familiar, can you just give us like a short snippet of what exactly does a forensic accountant do?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I've been working on my answer to this because I think what it really boils down to is having questions about money, whether where it went, who spent it, who it belongs to. I think that that's a good way to describe it across all areas of law. And then in matrimonial and divorce specifically, forensic accountants can help you figure out what money should or should not be in the marital pot for division, what a business might be worth, and thinking about the implications of that business valuation as it also relates to income that's available for support, and really any other questions about the flow of funds and the existence of funds in marital accounts.
Yeah, I would imagine that, at least from what I see, I think when people start going down the divorce route, they all of a sudden become more aware of money missing or hiding, or, I don't know why this is the way it is, but a lot of us just like put our blinders on in marriage. And then all of a sudden when we're getting divorced, it's like, wait, you make how much a year? And where did this 30,000 from the account go to? And so I guess at what point in the divorce process does it make sense to bring in a forensic accountant?
That's a great question. I always like to say as early as possible, knowing that sometimes you don't get all the facts until after you're through the discovery phase. I like that earlier process because we can help with the discovery request then and make sure we're getting all the documents we need for our analysis. Sometimes when we're brought in post discovery, it's kind of like, okay, well, this is what you get, see what you can make with it. So I always like to consult clients first and see, okay, do you actually need a forensic accountant? Because there's a lot of other great financial professionals that you might need that aren't forensic accountants. So I work a ton with CDFAs. I
Hmm.
think if there are financial assets involved, every case should have a CDFA on it. And then see what happens once you organize the documents, once you're putting the picture together. If you still have questions after that, bring in a forensic accountant to consult. But a lot of times, yes, 30,000 was taken out of one account, but it was deposited in another joint account, or it paid off a joint credit card, or it went to a joint investment account. And so
Hmm.
there are sometimes these transactions that look glaring at first glance, but there could be a reasonable explanation for it.
Hmm.
So the forensics come in when you're like, you know what? I'm still not sure. I'm still not confident that we found everything or this is the full picture. And then I
Okay.
would also say in forensics, there can be case specific situations where you need to bring us in as well. So one of them that we see a lot is separate versus marital property. So
Hmm.
if you and your spouse keep separate bank accounts, you have a joint account, and there's money flowing all over the place, you need a forensic accountant, regardless, to figure out how much of that money is marital, how much of it is separate, and at the end of the day, what is marital in each of the accounts and what is separate in each of the accounts.
Now, this might be a silly question, but is there a certain amount of money involved that would prompt someone to either decide to get a forensic accountant or decide to wash their hands and say it's not worth it, right? Like, I would assume if like, we're not going to hire a forensic accountant over a bank account that has $2,000 in it that we're
Correct.
fighting over, right? So, like,
Yes.
is there a monetary threshold that we're looking at?
Absolutely. So I do think it depends on the case and the analysis it needs. Sometimes a client will engage us for like 10 hours of work. And so that doesn't break the bank. It lets us look at everything. And then we can say, okay, we need to dive deeper. We think the upside is potentially 50,000. Our fees are 10,000. Let's move forward. But
Mhm.
then there are cases where we're like, okay, we're fighting over 10,000. My fees are going to be at least half of that. Let's
Mhm.
move on. So I do think it depends. I tend to say is just like a baseline. If it's not more than $40,000, I wouldn't bring a forensic accountant in. And then for the separate property tracing, because it's so extensive, I recommend like if it's not $100,000 or more, to just try to figure out a settlement. Every case is different, and that's not an industry rule. That's just what I've seen of when our fees can become more than the potential upside of our work.
That's great. That's a good point. Now, in that, I'm sure you already said you worked with CDFAs, and how does the lawyer fit into this? Because I know sometimes it's kind of a power struggle of, my lawyer doesn't think I need a forensic accountant, or I'm relying on my lawyer to also be a financial wizard and they're not. So, like, how do you work with lawyers?
Yeah, so that's a great question. A lot of times attorneys will bring me in, and then sometimes people will find me through their divorce coach or through their CDFA. I think there's a room for everyone at the table, and it truly depends. A lot of what my work is, it's a legal argument first and forensic accounting second. So, what I mean by that is if you think there's marital waste, so one spouse is like spending, maybe they have a gambling problem, and so they're spending hundreds of $1,000s on gambling, we can analyze those transactions and the extent of the loss. But if the attorney can't argue the marital waste legal argument, our analysis never comes into play. So I think we work really hand in hand together and we're very important. I do think a lot of attorneys have financial skills, there's software out there from doing this, but there becomes a point, like with other professionals too, where it's just beyond their scope. So I try to handle it that it's not a power struggle and that we're all just trying to get to the right place and the right answer. And sometimes attorneys are actually relieved when we come in because we're able to take something off their plate. It's maybe comparable or sometimes even less in fees than the attorney's office doing it themselves. And so we all just kind of work together to keep the case moving in the right direction.
I've always been a big fan of the team approach. Like you said, everyone has their area of expertise. Not all of us, like I'm not a financial expert, I'm not a law expert. And like you said, the lawyer might not be a financial expert. We all kind of know a little bit of everything, but we all, have our expertise in like one area. And so I agree that, if I was a lawyer, I'd be like, whoa, well, that's less than I have to dig deep into this side of things. So if you were the client, should you be the one looking for their forensic accountant? Because I think a lot of clients think that their lawyer would be the one to say, hey, let's get a forensic accountant in here. So like, how does that normally work?
So I think it's case specific. I think it should be part of your legal strategy conversations, but I also empower everyone to be their own advocate. Like, you know your finances, you know your situation best. A lot of times, like just like forensic accountants, like attorneys are working 20, 30 cases at a time. And as much as every client wants it, like their divorce is not going to be that attorney's number one priority 24/7, but it is going to be your number one priority 24/7 because you're living in it.
Mhm.
So at a certain point, have the conversation. I don't think it ever hurts to have a consult and see what's out there and see, is it something you want to move forward with? And then if you find a great forensic on your own, go back to your attorney. So one of the ways that I structure my engagement letters is I am engaged through the law firm and the client. So it ultimately has to become a team decision. So if someone goes out and finds me and they want to bring me in, it's not going to happen unless the attorney signs off and consents to it. So I think, always be your own advocate, ask your own questions, bring that information back to your attorney and see what happens. The worst case is you had a consult and they're going to say, you know what, I really don't think you need forensics. And we all move on.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, what are some financial red flags that somebody should look for if they do suspect their spouse isn't being totally transparent with the finances?
Yeah. So I think, every case is different. I think if one of the spouses owns a business, I highly recommend having a forensic accountant or a business valuation expert involved. A lot of times practices will do both. I do both. And so it doesn't mean that there's necessarily nefarious conduct, but it means that the finances are tricky and you need to make sure that they're all stated properly. So I think business ownership for sure. Other things, if you see super large transfers, withdrawals of cash, you're not sure where they're going, those are great conversations. Sometimes, if one spouse either admits to or there's suspicion of an affair and a lot of transactions have been charged on the accounts related to that, those are all good areas to be like, maybe we should just look a little bit closer at this and see if we're missing something.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some common, and you might have just answered this question, but what are some common tactics that people use to hide money or assets during a divorce? Are there some pretty common ones?
So I think it's getting harder and harder these days because of technology and everything being online payments. So what I say as a forensic accountant is if there is a trace to the money, we can generally figure out the direction it went in. So if you see a withdrawal from your account or you see a cash withdrawal, but there are still businesses that operate in cash. So you walk in, you hand them $100, they spend $100 at the liquor store. That money is not traceable. And, we can try our best, but things like that are going to be hard. I would say sometimes people will, if you have like a direct deposit from an employer, they'll change the account that the direct deposit goes into. And so it could go to a new account that's never ever had a transaction with your current accounts. So there's no way to see that on your bank statements because you're not seeing this transfer, but you can start identifying, oh, that's weird. Their paycheck started going down. I wonder what happened. And so
Mhm.
even though we might not be able to see every aspect, we can ask the questions, we can try to get the records we need to put that whole picture together.
Mhm. That's great. Yeah, it's very much like detective work with
Yeah.
money. And What about like Venmo, right? I get a lot of questions of, you know, look at his Venmo and you can see pings all over the place. Like, is that treated as cash or is that treated as something that like you have to look at a lot?
So it depends. And it depends how the Venmo account is kept. Like I have a Venmo account. We don't keep any balances in Venmo. So every single transaction is shown on our bank account. But if people keep balances, then that's within Venmo. And actually, an attorney's office can subpoena the records from PayPal and Venmo. Pretty sure that PayPal owns Venmo now. And you get the records and it will show you transaction by transaction.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, if you are a person in a marriage like this where you are concerned about the financial honesty of your partner, what are some simple steps that people can take right now to better protect their financial picture?
Yeah, so I would try to make sure you have an understanding of what accounts you own. There's different levels of what people may or may not be able to get access to. Like I would say save down 5 years worth of statements if you can in like an ideal situation from every credit card and every bank account. I know that's not possible for people. So sometimes what I even encourage is keep an eye on the mail and see, okay, there's something from JP Morgan, there's something from American Express, so that when you're working with your attorneys, you know which institutions to subpoena. So
Hmm.
it kind of goes from if you have access, download and save your statements. We're going to need them during the process. This makes it a lot easier. If you don't have access, there's no way for you to get it. Keep an eye on what's coming in and see, especially around tax time, there are these forms called 1099 interests or 1099 dividends. See which institutions are sending them and just keep that in your notes because that will help your attorney and your legal team be able to say, okay, it's worth it to subpoena this bank because every subpoena costs money. And so
Hmm.
sometimes if you're totally cut off, your attorney's sending a subpoena to every bank under the sun and costing you tens of thousands of dollars. But if
Right.
you know JP Morgan is where you have your bank and like your checking and savings, well, let's start with that. Then when we get those statements, we can see are there transfers to other accounts and we can build on it. So whatever
Hmm.
information you can get would be super helpful as you go through the process.
Yeah, that's good advice. What about do you ever run into a problem where the spouse who's in the dark financially doesn't have access to accounts or to know, like and I don't know how often this happens, but like let's say they're not using your home address as their billing address for these companies. Maybe they're using a work or a PO box and so you don't ever see the mail. Like how does somebody get access then?
So that's what's tricky. And that's when, like, sometimes your attorney just has to subpoena every bank under the sun. And you always have to make sure that there's enough assets to make that process be worthwhile. And I've
Now,
worked
oh, sorry.
Sorry,
Sorry.
no, I
Go
was gonna
ahead.
say I've worked cases where you send a subpoena to Wells Fargo and Wells Fargo comes back and says, no, there are no accounts here under those names.
Now, what is the other party who is doing the financial infidelity or whatever you want to call it? Aren't they legally supposed to give these records
Yes, the answer is
instead
yes.
of like having to subpoena every bank in the world? Isn't, their lawyer telling them come up with all of your account information?
Yes, that's how it should be. I think family law can be a little bit more creative. I don't know if that's a good word to say it, than
The understatement of the century.
some other legal fields. And I think there is a surplus of cases, there's a surplus of activity in the courts. And I think they focus on what is most important and what is most impactful. And people can sometimes get away with not doing what they're supposed to do during the process.
Sure, absolutely. So I guess that leads me to my next question is there a way for you or how do you as a forensic accountant help someone who feels totally overwhelmed by the finances? Because I think that, there's obviously two parts to the divorce, especially if there's children involved, right? It's like the finances and the kids. If there's no kids, usually it's just the finances. So people become very overwhelmed with this document gathering, doing the detective work, having to download and organize and backtrack and all of these things. And so I'm sure they come to you very overwhelmed. So like what is some good advice that you give them?
Yeah. So They come to me overwhelmed. I usually say that if your case is large enough to need a forensic accountant, you probably also need a CDF. And CDFAs are great. I know a lot of them will do divorce financial planning and really help get those documents gathered, get the picture, see where we want to go throughout the divorce, and then what it looks like post divorce. So I would say we do a little bit less of that planning and maybe the hand holding through the financial process. We still get documents that are a mess. We still get people that are very emotionally charged and, it's a high conflict time in their life. And so we try to do the best we can, but I usually suggest that there's another professional they probably need to help get them organized and help get them on track while we kind of solve for some missing pieces of that plan.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So, speaking of getting organized, are there any tools or systems or apps or anything that you recommend for people to track spending, accounts, or assets throughout the process?
Yeah, so it depends what people use. I've seen people use like Quicken, where you can kind of import all of your bank statements, all of your credit card statements, see your spending. I know some people use like Excel trackers, whatever they want to do. I think what's really important, especially for those people who have never been in charge of the finances, is to just figure out a system to keep track of things. And so it could be Quicken, it could be an Excel file, it could be my husband and I use like Monarch, which is an app on our phone, just something that shows you, okay, what is my typical spending? Just so
Mhm.
you kind of have this baseline to think about of what's my spending and then how much income do I need to be able to afford this spending? Do I need to change my spending? And all of those questions. And you can't really start asking them until you have some data around what your baseline is.
Right. And I'm sure you experienced this, and I experienced this in all aspects of like the divorce process, but finances, especially, it is, and especially if you're not the one who's been taking care of the finances and knowing like the incoming and outgoing and all of those, like it's so easy to stick your head in the sand. And so sometimes that is the hardest part is the tracking and the budgeting and realizing, oh man, I do spend like $300 a month at Starbucks or, whatever the case may
Right.
be. Nobody wants to know where their
No,
money is going.
yeah, you're like, I don't wanna know what I'm spending. I don't wanna see those numbers. And that's another plug I can give for like the certified financial planners as well. They are great. They can help you come up with whatever plan you need. I think as scary as finances are in the divorce space, I think they're the most professionals in the finance space, whether it's the forensics, the CDFAs, the CFPs, the financial advisors, whoever it is, who have a lot of experience to help kind of change the mindset in the ways that you need to, and then be set for, the present and the future planning.
Now, going back to divorcing with kids, does your forensic analysis, does anything that you do affect custody or support outcomes or anything like that?
Really, I would say sometimes what we do is we can calculate the income available for support. So if there is a business owner and they're paying for all of their personal expenses through the business, so it looks like they don't make any money for support, we can go in and parse that out and say, no, their effective income or their imputed income is actually X. But then we kind of hand it off. So it's either handed off to a CDFA, another professional who's doing the calculations, and that's where it will be considered. I also do have a case where there's some like double dipping between children's expenses of they pay for the family phone plan through their business, but then they're claiming the children's cell phones as an expense that they need for child support or child support offset. So we can also do that type of analysis of like, okay, when you fill out like New York calls it a statement of net worth, there are different statements for every state of, this is how much I make, this is how much I spend, and keeping an eye on those spending categories if they do have a business and they're actually spending them through the business and not personally.
Makes sense. Is there anything like, is there one myth about divorce finances that you would like to debunk that you hear a lot?
Wow. I feel like more people think someone's hiding money than they are. I'm not saying it
Mm.
doesn't happen all the time, and I'm sure it does. But I think this like fight or flight mode panic happens in the divorce, especially when you haven't been in charge of the finances and you're like, oh my gosh, he's stealing everything. And it's like, okay, like, let's take a step back. Let's take a breath. Let's see, like, okay, well, maybe he now has moved out of the house and he has rental expense and he has to buy a bed and he has to buy furniture. And so, like, immediately when you see that $10,000 transaction, it's like, okay, I'm not playing nice anymore. He's officially stealing money. And really, there's more often than not an explanation for the movement of funds.
That's good to know. Yeah, I guess you're right because I think we probably assume the opposite. Like everyone's hiding money, and especially with sports gambling being such a big thing, I hear that a lot from clients who are finding out that their spouse is doing all these like online sports betting. Okay, so what advice would you give to someone who's just starting the divorce process but isn't really sure if they need a forensic?
Yeah, so my advice would be like get your team in order, get your documents in order, and if the trusted people around you on your team, it's still not adding up and everyone's taking a look at it, bring someone in, do a consult. Like I believe in starting small. I know other forensics will have different philosophies, but I don't jump like, okay, we're going to trial, you need a 50-page report. Please pay me $100,000. I like to take off small bites and I'll say, okay, let's have a consult. Did we learn something in the consult? Maybe we answered our questions. No. Pay for a few hours worth of work. It's not a full engagement. Let's just take a look at the documents. Let's see what's going on. Is it worth it to dive deeper? Like we can work in baby steps so that you feel you have your answers. So if we work in baby steps and we get, 3 hours worth of work and we say, oh, yep, that question, we found the answer, here it is. Do you feel satisfied? Are you comfortable moving on? We don't need a forensics. Or, you know what? I looked into it. I think there's something. I can't tell you what it is, but let's try another 5. Let's try another 10 hours and just kind of build to see
Mhm.
what's there and if the value of what's there is worth our fees.
That's a good point. I do know that a lot of people get turned off, especially with lawyers who are asking these big retainers and you don't know, am I going to be getting money back from that? Am I going to have to be paying more than that? Like, we don't really know how far we have to go, right? But if you can bite-size chunk it, like you said, and if you're getting the answers that you're looking for, that's peace of mind. You're not having to come out of pocket, but so much only for the work that's being done. How involved are clients with you and the work? Like once they kind of give you your documents and they give you their questions and things like that, and you're saying, okay, let's do another 5 or 10 hours of work. How involved are the clients in all of that process?
So it really depends on the case. If we just like get a chunk of time that we're going to work, we'll generally, like, let's say it's a 5 hours. I'll work 4.5 hours and then we'll have a 30-minute call of this is how much we've gotten. This is where we think we're going. This is some potential next steps or whatever our findings are. For some of the larger engagements, I can talk to clients almost every day or every other day. I would say that if you are a client with a larger engagement, trust your forensics, give them a little bit of breathing room to do their analysis. They are trying to figure out what's going on, but I'm always open to conversation. And there's things like if I'm going through your bank accounts, you know them better than anyone. So instead of me spinning my wheels of like, what's this $300 purchase that we see once a month? I'm going to call you and you're going to tell me it's your pool maintenance. And then I put that in and we move on. So
Mhm.
there's definitely input that I would say, but I would also just caution that your forensic accounting expert, while they have been hired by your side, is a third party independent. And we have very strict, let's say, rules and regulations, but around it. And so just because I'm on your team doesn't mean I'm not going to change the numbers in your favor. I'm not going to, compromise my professional credibility in any way. But it's okay if I ask for your input to figure things out. But ultimately, there is a degree of separation because I do have to be impartial and independent in my calculations.
Mhm. Yeah, that's actually really good to know. And do you ever find it where a client is so convinced that their spouse is hiding money, and then you come back and say, oh no, like there's an explanation for everything, and they're still convinced that the other side is doing something malicious.
Yeah, I've had that before. I've also had situations where I think in the divorce, it can be very common to double count income, whether that's in a business valuation or whatever we're doing. And I feel very strongly about that. And I've had clients say, well, we'll go find someone who will. And everyone's welcome to pick their own forensic accounting expert. You know, they are paying the bills, but I think it's important that we are impartial and that we give fair advice. So I had a case where we didn't have all the records from the business, and the business was owned by one spouse. I was on the team of the other spouse. We had to make assumptions, and so we made a lot of assumptions to the benefit of the other spouse because we couldn't figure out the answer to the information. And so part of it is saying, okay, if I go into court and I write a report where I wrote down everything that you asked me to do, it's going to get thrown out in 2 seconds because no one's going to take it seriously. So we have to
Hmm.
think about, like, do we want the right answer or do we want to be right? And sometimes those are two separate things.
Yes. Right. Yeah, you're totally right. And not, that's definitely true in this area, but it's true in a lot of areas of divorce. If you have to go in before a judge, it's like, unfortunately, you learn the harsh reality of nobody really cares what your truth is or what your story is. And that's not the time and place to, do a Dear Diary journal entry, looking at what's in front of us, and it's black and white, and there's not really a lot of room for gray areas. So yeah, it's not proving a point, it's also being able to prove a point to get the result that you're wanting to get as well. So it's a
Yeah.
delicate dance that we're all learning.
Yeah. And my company, our like tagline is where numbers speak the truth, because we are working with like true source data. And so if you're telling me you're convinced your husband's stealing money and I can't see it, I might not be the right professional for you. Maybe you
Mm.
need a private investigator. Maybe you need something else that's going to, tame your suspicions and maybe find that answer or give you comfort that you've exhausted all methods to look at it.
Mhm.
But we're not advocates. We are there to look at the numbers and tell people what happened based on
Yeah.
those numbers.
Yep, that's good to know. So to wrap up, are there any resources like books, websites, or tools that you recommend for people navigating divorce finance?
It's a great question. And honestly, I haven't come across it before. So I don't have a recommendation in mind. But I would say that make sure the professionals you work with are like verified. Like there's so many different divorce credentials that you can get in the financial space, and there's a lot of great professionals. There's the I guess here's a website. The IDFA website is where you can find a CDFA who has gone through all the training, is up to date in their requisites. And I also find just like support groups. I don't know, like other communities and things like that. I would say don't take your financial advice from them, but have a network of people to talk to because you're not the only one going through the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how can listeners connect with you if they want to learn more about you or work with you?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's www.snforensics.com. You can book a consultation directly through the website. And I also have a LinkedIn page, so you can follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to me either directly or through the company page.
Okay, excellent. And I will link all of those in the episode's bio so listeners can find it there. But Sara, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today and your insight into this side of divorce is all kind of scary to some of us who are not forensic accountants.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you're navigating the challenging journey of divorce and need personalized guidance, I'm here to help. As a dedicated divorce coach, I can support you through every step of the process, providing the tools and strategies you need to rebuild and thrive. Visit my website at shaunawardencoaching.com to book your appointment today. Remember, you don't have to go through this alone. Together, we can turn this difficult time into a new beginning. Until next time, take care and stay strong.